Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good, very good. It's late where I am. It's almost midday where you are. But so far so good. Last time we spoke, Chris, you told me a story about turning down the rowing team because you didn't want to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, sit in the cold, or shave your head. So looking back now, Chris, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you said yes?
Well, to tell you the truth, not much. Not much. I mean, the reality is the University of Washington has one of the top rowing programs in the world, right? And they continue to be national and international champions. And it's a whole world that I'm sure would have opened. But I went instead kind of in the opposite direction and became captain of the rugby team. And that in and of
Mm.
itself opened a whole different set of doors. And frankly, three of my closest friends are guys that I met playing rugby at the University of Washington. We're still pals, 40, 50 years later. So I've got no real regrets about it. I mean, every once in a while, the rowers get covered in glory and they get a lot of TV attention. But, sorry, 5 o'clock in the morning, out in the dark, in the wet, in the cold, with a buzz cut. As a 19-year-old kid, that was never going to work.
No, no. It's funny because that story sounds simple, but it touches something bigger. We spend so much time talking about transformation, yet most of it start with small decisions that seems insignificant at the time. That's where I love to begin today. Let's get into this conversation.
All right.
The following is a conversation with Chris Majer, a leadership strategist, founder of Human Potential Project, an Amazon best-selling author and advisor to executives, entrepreneurs, military leaders, and high-performance teams. This is Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast, and I'm your host, Sid Bensalah. Today, we delve into leadership, transformation, human potential, and what it truly takes to create lasting change within ourselves, our teams, and our organizations. Thank you so much for tuning in, subscribing, and supporting the show. Your support and financial contribution helps us bring authentic voices, real stories, and conversations that go beyond the game. If you would like to support the show, please check the description for more. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks again. As always, great to be here.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation since our last chat last year. So you've spent decades helping people transform from Fortune 500 executives and entrepreneurs to military leaders and elite performers. But before we discuss leadership, business, or transformation, I'd like to start with the person behind the work. When you look back, Chris, on your younger self, what experiences shaped the Chris Majer we see today?
Oh, Lord. Oh, yeah, let's not fool around with anything trivial. What experiences? Well, let's go back in time. So I was born and raised in Spokane, Washington, a town you've never heard of, 200,000 people. My father was the Ford dealer in Spokane. His father was the Ford dealer.
Right.
I was supposed to be the third generation. And
Okay.
when I was 18 and full of myself, as you are at that age, I told my dad I just couldn't see myself wearing a white belt, white shoes, and selling Ford Pintos. That conversation did not go over well. And I headed off to the University of Washington. He didn't really want me to go there. So I was, a little on shaky ground to begin with at that point in my life. Now, I hit the campus in the fall of 1969.
Right.
People may remember the history. In the spring of 1970, so some 6 months later, the whole world erupted, right? We had Kent State and protests. The next thing I know, I'm leading marches down the freeways And I became the broadcast voice of Radio Free Seattle as we took over the campus radio station. And all this at the ripe old age of 19, 20 years old. So I had set out to be an attorney. That didn't prove to be the case. I, as you heard, said no to the rowing team, ended up playing rugby, and I graduated, did a master's degree with an organizational development, and went to work for the county executive here, which is kind of like a regional governor, and thought, this could be it. I spent, 2 years working in that office, and realized that government was not for me. So I think the seminal experience, the seminal turning point was right about this time. As I said, I was a rugby player. Every year there was a big fancy tournament down in Monterey, California. 35 teams invited from around the world, very elite. We were consistently invited down there. And I got to the airport and realized that the book that I was reading, I'd left on my bedside table. I go, oh, crap. Now what am I going to do? I'm not the kind of guy who can stare out the window for 3 or 4 hours or read the in-flight magazine 10 times. So, hey, I'm a pretty bright guy. Let's figure this out. Let's go get another book. How hard is this? So I went to the airport bookstore. You've been to the airport bookstore. Everybody listening to this has been to the airport bookstore. You know what it is. This big wall of books here. And there's, history books and thrillers and bodice rippers and, all kinds of stuff. This is going to sound a little strange now, I admit this, but up in the far high corner, there's this little book, and it literally started talking to me. I don't mean like an audio book. It was somehow talking in my head. And I'm looking around like, what the world is going on here? So clearly, I was supposed to buy this book, which I did. It was called The Ultimate Athlete by a guy named George Leonard. And I thought, oh, well, perfect, I'm supposed to read this and I'll learn something. It'll help improve my game. We'll have an even better weekend, da-da-da-da. So I get the book, get on the plane, start reading, and I didn't put it down till we landed, 2.5, 3 hours later. But at the end of it, I was left with, wow, I don't understand a lot of what this guy was writing about. He's talking about things like intentionality and synchronicity and some Japanese energy called ki and some martial art called Aikido that I'd never heard of. So, but I don't understand this stuff, but I like it. It resonated with me somehow. So the answer to your question, the seminal terminal event in my life was literally a mystical experience in the airport bookstore.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. What kind of kid were you growing up?
What kind of kid was I? Well, I suppose that, of course, is going to depend on who you ask. I would say a prototypical, I was a little kid in the 50s, high school in the 60s. I was president of the class of 1969. And this was back in, it was a different time then. So, cars, girls, I was not an academic standout, to be clear. And I was, then on a track to kind of take over the family business, which didn't happen. So I don't know what else you want to know. I mean, I was like classic all-American kid. I was a Cub Scout, kind of flamed out in the Boy Scouts, played high school sports. I was the keyboard man in a rock and roll band, and we were pretty good. And we toured the whole area here, and it was all just kind of, in retrospect, it was the perfect kind of growing up. Didn't get any better than that. And then right. Off to college, and you kind of heard a little bit of it from there. Everything changed right. Once I got to campus.
So it's interesting, Chris, what you told us earlier, that in the 70s you led a protest. Can I say maybe looking back, that event, maybe it's one of the experiences that shaped your view of leadership?
Oh, absolutely. The moment was we were deeply into the Vietnam War, a vastly unpopular war. And part of the reason lots of kids were in college was they didn't want to get drafted. You know,
Yeah.
now that wasn't the case for me, but here's an interesting footnote. While I'm in school at the University of Washington, my dad was chairman of the draft board back in Spokane.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oi.
yeah. So that made for an interesting dynamic in that I had all of the local press constantly
Oi.
checking up on me, making sure I wasn't getting some special treatment or
Right.
something. Because
Right.
the thing you did not want was to get that dreaded letter from the draft board now that you'd been classified 1A. And what would happen is that all these people that never had any time for me back home would suddenly wanted to be my new best friend. Hey, guess what, man? You won't believe it. Oh, I converted. I'm a Christian now. I'm a nonviolent person. I need to get a draft deferment. And I'm like, give it a rest, you know. So it was pretty weird. I'll give you this to think about. So one day it's a Saturday morning. I'm hungover from Friday night. I trundle down to get the mail, and I get this, and there it is. There's the dreaded letter from the draft board. I thought, oh my God, I
Wow.
thought I was in good shape. What the hell? So I open it up, and it's the one you didn't want to get. Mr. Christopher Majer, blah, blah, blah. This to inform you you've been classified 1A. You need to report for your physical, blah, 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 and all the blood drains from my face. And then down at the bottom, in a little hand-scrolled note, April Fools, love, Dad. You know, oh, you asshole.
Love it.
You wait. Just wait till you're old and in a wheelchair. You're going down the stairs for that.
Oi.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Was there a moment when you realized you wanted to help people develop their potential?
Yeah, when I was in graduate school, I had interesting opportunities seemed to fall my way. I got called into a professor's office. I was asleep one morning. I was a little bit of a rabble rouser and hellion in those days, and apparently had a reputation as such. So I got a call one Saturday morning at 7:30 in the morning, for God's sakes, and some woman's on the phone. Mr. Major, yeah. This is, Mrs. Throttlebottom. I'm Professor Gore's secretary. Like, well, lucky you. Okay. So what? She says, the professor would like to see you. I'm like, what? It's 7:30 on Saturday? No, not now. He wants to see you. Well, why are you calling me? Well, we heard about you and figured this would be the only safe time to get you. Great. So he wants to see you Wednesday at 3. I'm like, okay, great. But who's Professor Gore? I know who this guy was. So he's one of the senior professors in the political science department. Okay, great. So I go see this guy, and he looks at me. Now, what year is it? It's 1971, 72. And the first thing out of his mouth is, how'd you like to go to Alaska? I'm like, are you nuts? What? He says, and he laid out the little school up in Sitka had gotten a grant to do this educational program for villages to help implement the Native Claims Settlement Act.
Right.
And they needed competent people. I'd been, finishing up my studies in the Graduate School of Public Administration. So, we need some hotshots. You're supposedly one of the hotshots to go up there and get this program going. I thought, well, I'm not so wild about that. And he says, well, and we go on for about half an hour, and finally he says, no, and we'll pay you $4,000 a month plus all your expenses. Oh, dude, you should have led with that. that was your opening line.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because that was a lot of money in those days for a graduate student, right? And so we put together this team. We went up to Alaska, and all this was about implementing the Native Claims Settlement Act. And I thought, well, if that's what we're doing, maybe I better read this Native Claims Settlement Act so I know what's going on here. I started reading this thing, and to be blunt about it, said I was left with, Jesus H, right. The language in this thing is tries to obfuscate the fact that once again, we're trying to screw over the Indians. I can't believe it. This is like stuff from the 1800s. the basic premise of the Native Claims Settlement Act was we want to build this Alaska pipeline. We have to buy and set aside land for it. We need to get it from the natives. So they wrote a check for $900 million, split amongst these regions and then down to the villages. But if you read it, the basic premise was we're going to give you title to the land and this money, and then you set up and do whatever you want with it. And then in the fine print, oh, by the way, we can't give you title to the land right now because most of Alaska has never been surveyed. But we'll give you the money. And in the back of their minds, they're going, well, we'll give you the money because we know you won't know what to do with it. You'll squander it. And then we'll take the land back since you can't pay back these loans, so forth and so on. And I was like, oh, man. So that kind of woke me up to, the way that we've been treating not just Native Americans, but people in general, and started me on, this different path of, well, okay, wait just a minute here. And my grandfather had been a social activist, and my other grandfather had kind of run the town of Spokane. I mean, he was chairman of the Democratic Party and, 33rd degree Mason and Shriners and all that kind of stuff. So there's a little something in the blood. My dad's high school buddy was then the Speaker of the House, Tom Foley. So I was raised and immersed in that kind of stuff forever. That kind of set me into motion.
Right. Going back and talking about the story of the book at the airport bookstore, what was it about that book that captured your imagination, Chris?
Well, as I said, he had described phenomenon, some of which I had experienced, and didn't really understand what they were. And I thought, fascinating. And then, he kept talking about all these, intentionality and synchronicity. And I'd heard the words, but he had described them and kind of operationalized them. And I thought, I get it. This is cool. And, shortly after reading, 6-9 months later, I was in my 30, 31, 32 years old. I said, two things need to change here. One, my body's not going to take playing rugby much longer, right?
Anymore, yeah.
And two, I probably need to grow up. So while all my peers were building families and careers, I was just working enough to support my rugby playing habit and doing things like off to Alaska to set up this program. And I started a couple businesses and, that. And after that experience, I took up the study of Aikido. And, I'd gotten it from the book, and I met a guy there who was a sports psychologist. Now, this in time now, it's like 1980 or so. And I was fascinated by him because he had sciencey sounding explanations for experiences that I had and written off as too many bangs on the head or flashbacks to the 60s. And we got to be buddies. He'd been a world-class skier, been on the K2 demonstration team, would have been an Olympian, but he blew up a knee. And we were just young enough and not worldly enough to understand it probably wasn't a good idea. So we started a business. And our very first business was called Sports Mind. And our mission was simple. We want to isolate and reproduce in others the elements that led to consistent winning performance. And our only focus was on athletes, because in the realm of athletics, it wasn't just permitted, but expected that you were going to push the boundaries. And that's what we were interested in.
Let's shift gear and talk about building the Human Potential Project. What problem were you trying to solve when you founded the HPE2?
Well, I hope you got the last little bit that I said. The original iteration of the company was called Sports Mind. And in those days, I don't know how to explain it. All I can say is Providence smiled on us. All right. So we had built all this work with athletes. We went from working with individuals to teams. Then we worked with Olympic teams, national teams, professional teams. Much to our surprise, Providence suggested we needed to change, so that caught the attention of the Army. And that was never part of any business plan I had. And so I went to Fort Hood, Texas to talk to the leadership down there. 6 weeks later, we had a sole source contract with the United States Army. And for almost 3 years, we worked with the Army, helping them redesign the way they trained soldiers. That work Oh boy. That work caught the attention of the Special Forces. There's lots of little sidebars here I could go down to, but will be hours. And we ended up with a sole source contract with the Special Forces, where we had a programmatic blank check to push the boundaries of human performance. They gave us 2 A teams for a year, right? We had
Right.
operational control of 2 Special Forces teams 24 hours a day for 6 months. It took us 3 months to design the program, 6 months to deliver it, 3 months to do all the reporting and so forth. We set all kinds of records, some of which stand to this day, and some of that work that we did is still classified. At the end of that, I said to my guys, look, we've been fortunate. We've had the opportunity to design, develop, and deliver a body of work that's proven effective in 2 arenas where performance matters and where you can measure it. First with athletes, then with soldiers. I don't want to spend my whole career training soldiers. The actual work of training the soldiers was great. It was the best stuff we ever did, and they were absolutely wonderful to work with. The process of getting to do the work, the government's contracting process, was sufficiently odious. And, in retrospect, this may have been a mistake, but I didn't feel like hiring 4 or 5 people just to do contract compliance, right? So we're going to pivot. We're going to turn our attention to building corporate programs. And all of my people looked at me like, what? I said, and they're going to be harder. And then they really went, give me that RCA dog look, that, arr? I said, I don't mean physically harder, you idiots. Think about it. In the corporate world, there's no timeout, there's no spring training, there's no off season, there's no stand down. The game goes all the time. And on any given team, there's a vast gap in the level of competence and commitment on the part of the players. How do we work in that arena? Now, remember when I said Providence smiled on us? So I said, I'm going to write a business plan. I want to get some capital in here. I don't want to just run a little mom and pop business. And they all looked at me and said, what do you know about writing business plans? Nothing, but that's never bothered me before. If I can write theses on stuff, it can't be that hard. So I wrote a plan, talked to a couple people I knew in the business community, and they, along with my team, all said, ooh, this is going to be a toughie. It's a service business. People don't understand it. All of your assets walk out the door every night. And it's kind of a woo-woo thing. Not sure, how it's going to go. The very first guy I talked to said, this is the coolest thing ever, and wrote me a check for $450,000 in 1984. So,
Hey.
yeah, so I'm left with, what's so hard about this? What's the big deal about raising money? I said, talk to one guy, it works. So little did I know. So we built a corporate program. We needed some place to test it. All right, this guy's partner owned a manufacturing company in a little tiny town nobody's ever heard of called Shelton, Washington, where they took these massive ingots. And when I say ingots, I mean they were like 4 feet wide, 8 feet long, and 6 or 8 inches thick of aluminum, and run them through these big milling machines and made doors, single piece doors for Boeing airplanes.
Right.
And it was a 300-person shop. We put everybody in the place through this program. And my thought was real simple. If this doesn't work here, no one's ever going to know about it. And if it does, it'll work anywhere. If it works in this environment, it'll work anywhere.
It will work here. Yeah.
Yeah, we blew the socks off the place. The guys told us that, it's at maximum production. All of our statistical models show that we can't possibly be producing anymore, but, knock yourselves out. So 6 weeks later, productivity was up 20%. They couldn't believe it, right?
Wow.
Now, my second client, get this, was AT&T, Providence.
Okay.
Yeah, so I went from nowhere to center ring in the circus. We went from 5 guys to 85 guys in 6 months. And as I tell everybody, the business succeeded oftentimes despite my best efforts. And we were launched into the mainstream.
Right.
The backstory here is also kind of entertaining, all around my theme of, Providence smiles on us. So AT&T had just been broken up. Right? They broke it up into all the little baby bells, and we were working with the flagship company. They had, the consumer products division had 400 phone stores around the country and 35 business offices. They were 40,000 people losing $220 million a year. And under the old Bell system, it's not that nobody cared, but it wasn't that big of a deal because they were a monopoly and they made a boatload of money off their long distance and other businesses. But now they got to get competitive, so the board says to them, look, you got 18 months to turn this around. If you can't do it, we'll just shut it down and do retail through Sears, okay? So now I'm going to tell you a story here, and I know it's true because I've got lots of people who verified it, so I'm not just making stuff up. So the then divisional president, they don't know what to do, so they called in McKinsey, right? Yay, let's get McKinsey. So McKinsey comes in, takes the head count from 40,000 to 16,000 in 9 months. Just think about that in terms of your corporate culture. And is very proud of themselves because their mission was to stop the financial hemorrhaging, and lo, it had stopped. They were completely blind to the fact that so had everything else. You know, it's the arrogant doctor who's crowing that the patients quit bleeding. Well, it's because he's dead, you nitwit. So the then divisional president, Bertuccini, doesn't know what to do. There's no Harvard case study for this kind of situation. So he gathers his most intimate, tightly, bound group of managers, all 200 of them, into the Parsippany, New Jersey Hilton ballroom to have a talk about this. Now, this is in these days, I don't know if you were ever part of some big company, but this is in the days of, great bureaucratic, stuffiness. So the way it worked was we had 200 people in the room. You wrote your questions on a little 3x5 card. You sent them down to the end of the aisle, and they sent all those up to the front. And then there was 2 little staffers up there who would vet these things because we didn't want anybody asking anything too incendiary. Now, get this. So in the back of the room, of which there was 198 men and 2 women, the young woman, 27 years old, she had 2 people reporting to her, so technically she was a manager. She can't take it anymore. She jumps up from the back of the room and goes, "Come on, you guys, let's cut the crap. What's it going to take to turn this thing around?" Now you got to get the visuals here. So all of a sudden, 198 middle-aged guys' heads whip around. You can't speak to the great Bertuccini that way. And Bertuccini, he's Italian. He's a little fiery. He grabs a hold of the podium and steps back from it. And pardon me, I'm going to quote him. He mutters under his breath, "It's going to take a fucking miracle." Well, now all the heads whip around the other way because they're not sure what's more shocking. Ken said a bad word or he told the truth. So in the dead silence that hung there, they said, "Okay, got it. Let's drop the F part. We need a miracle." And they set out, they interviewed 60 firms and chose us with my vast corporate experience, one, but we had a unique product offer, right? And the mandate, we launched this program. The program was called Project Miracles. Perfect name, huh? So our mandate was real simple.
Wow.
We need a miracle. And I don't know if you remember the old Mike and the Mechanics song, "All I Need Is a Miracle." That was our theme song for this thing. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that song. And we put 6,000 managers through this 4.5-day and some follow-up work program. We were doing 2 or 3 of these a week for a couple of years. I mean, just burning down the place. And they went from break even to generating a cumulative total of $3 billion in profit over the next 48 months.
Fantastic.
And that launched what I refer to as a very robust When Harry Met Sally marketing campaign. So, oh, thank God, I don't know what they're doing over there, but we better have some of that. And so my marketing consisted of, answering the phone for about 3 or 4 years. We did, I don't know how many millions of dollars worth of business with AT&T. And that launched us into the mainstream. I was on the Today Show and McNeil Lair and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we worked with AT&T, Amgen, Intel, Microsoft, Cargill, Capital One, a whole host of blue chip clients. I've got a client list that is just the envy of everybody's.
Wow. Love those stories from performance athletes to military to corporation. Why do you think, Chris, so many people never reach their potential?
Well, there's, I think, two main things. One is they're uncomfortable with the conversation. If you start talking to somebody about, reaching your full potential, they listen, you're criticizing me, and you think that I've got some potential that I may not even believe that I've got, and then they start to feel bad about themselves, so they'd rather not talk about it at all. Or two, once they begin to think, well, maybe there is something more out there, they get afraid. Fear is the biggest thing that keeps people from realizing their full potential.
Yeah.
And I think lastly, I'll make it three things. You and I and everybody else, we toss this term transformation around, and I don't think most people fully understand what it means. In my view, having done this for some time, transformation isn't magic, right? It is the result of focused intent and work, but it's essentially a large amount of change in a short amount of time. That's the key. It's a large amount of change in a short amount of time. Now, if you and I are watching a team over here and they're doing whatever it is they're doing today, and we come back in 4 months and, obviously their performance is dramatically different. We go, wow, they transformed, right? Well, that's because we haven't been around for, 4 months.
Yeah.
In the day-to-day step improvements that it takes to get to that transformed state, Now, every once in a while, somebody could whack it with a magic wand, but that's pretty rare. The real work of transformation is just that, real work, true.
Yeah. And I guess that explains what really separates people who transform from those who stay stuck.
Well, here's the thing. What we learned early on in working with athletes is, transformation is, just like I said, it's a large amount of change in a short amount of time. The axiom that I use with everybody is you can't change if you don't learn, and you can't learn if you don't change.
If you don't change, yeah.
Okay? Now, that sounds simple. Great. Let's turn that into a poster. Yay. But what does that mean? Well, the problem here is we, as a society, global society, have been sold a bill of goods about learning. Because when we think learning, we tend to think school. And in school, learning meant memorize, right? And the process was the gaining of insight, understanding, information, facts, data, models, all for the sake of building and gaining understanding, because understanding was the holy grail. To understand is to know, right?
Right.
And in an academic sense, that probably works, but nowhere else.
Yeah.
So what we learned in working with athletes, and really clear, I'm sure you understand this, is what you understood was nice, but didn't really matter. Understanding is the booby price. What matters is what can you do. All right. So now this is where people get their eggs a little scrambled. While your mind understands, and understanding can in fact occur in an instant, in the end it's your body that learns. Your mind understands, but it's your body that learns. And the body only learns one way, and that's through practice.
It's
Right?
and practice.
How you build competence. No amount of understanding ever produced competence in anything, period. Right?
Period.
So that's why one of the things that sets us apart is all of our programs unfold over time. I don't have any one-day wonder programs, right? You need to work for months to build new practices, to build new things. You know this in working with athletes. Nobody got to be good in a week, right? It's, he's an instant success. Yeah, well, he's an instant success that's been building for 15 years, right? So it's in understanding what it really takes, right? You have to stay with it. The whole notion of learning as we talk about a learning curve. It doesn't work that way.
No.
It's a stair-step process.
No.
And if you don't have a commitment to really to what we refer to as authentic learning, there's not going to be any learning, let alone any transformation. People give up too soon. Most adults don't ever learn anything, because the first step in actual learning is being a beginner. And a beginner is the person who makes all three of the following declarations. I see there's some domain in which I'm not competent, but I'm committed to learn. Number two, I'm going to authorize someone to coach me. The whole notion that I'm going to teach myself is just complete ridiculousness. I'm going to teach someone to coach me. I'm going to get guidance from somebody who's either been down this road or knows what they're doing, because I don't. And yeah, I might bump along, but I'm going to just that, bump along, as opposed to figure out where's the course here. And third, and this is the hard thing for adults, I'm going to be at peace with being a beginner. We are, as adults, so invested in looking cool that we won't take it's a beginner. When a beginner, you make all the dumb mistakes.
Yeah.
My tennis serve looks like batting practice at baseball. Oh, there it is. It's up and over the 400-foot fence. If you're a beginner skier, this is where you spend most of your time, on your face or your butt. And most adults aren't willing to do that.
No.
So they
No.
don't learn anything and get cranky about it when you point that out.
Yeah.
So one of the things I tell people is what you're fighting as you get older is there's two. You of course know what arterial sclerosis is, right? Hardening of the arteries. Well, the thing that's more dangerous is what we call psychosclerosis, the hardening of the attitudes. And you watch it as people get older and more rigid, both physically and psychologically, until, what was this vibrant, 25-year-old is now, hey, you kids, get off my lawn. No, it's just, you got to keep stimulating the neural pathways. So I tell people, look, if you want to stay young, you want to be alive, you need to teach yourself something or learn something new. And by that something, I mean something physical every few years, right? And yes, it's uncomfortable, and I practice what I preach. I was a skier as a kid, and I still am. And the snowboarding came out, and I thought, well, no. But I resisted for a while, and I thought, okay, I'm going to check this out. Now, I know myself. I teach this stuff, and I'm not immune from it. I said, okay. So I booked private lessons. I'm not going to sit there with a bunch of 10-year-olds trying to learn how to, I was 45 at the time, right? Trying to learn how to snowboard. I booked a hotel room at the top of the mountain, paid for it in advance for the weekend. I didn't take my skis with me because I knew exactly what would happen. And for the first couple days, like I said, I was on the bunny hill, on my face, on my ass. And these little kids are whizzing by me, and I'm shaking my fist at them. You little bastards, you should see me ski. No, they didn't care. And by about day 3 then, okay, I'm getting it. And so for 2-3 years, all I did was snowboard. Got really good at it. The only thing I didn't like was, I don't know if you do any of these things, but you get flatted out. You have to unbuckle.
Yes.
That's like, this sucks.
Yeah, go to the bindings and
all these new shaped skis that made it all so much easier. And I went back to skiing and have been doing that ever since. But the point is, you've got to keep the system stimulated, keep it moving.
Yeah. Chris, we have this fantastic say in French. C'est en forgeant qu'on devient forgeron, meaning if you want to be a blacksmith, there is only one way. Roll your sleeves, take the hammer and go in and practice and learn and learn and learn. There is no other way. I fully agree with you. And thanks for sharing all that.
Well, and here's the thing. People can understand that when we're talking about sports or anything athletic, but it's no different when you're trying to learn a new leadership practice, a new management practice. People are like, well, why does your program take 9 months? Can't you condense it? Well, I can, but it won't do you any good, because you need that amount of time to learn these new practices, to go out and do them and have them not work and figure out how to do it right or how to do it better or how to do it, whatever term you like. And you need the coach to work with you over that time. People, I'm making stuff up now. You're 40, you're 50, you're 60 years old. You spent 30, 40, 50 years learning to be the you that you are now. It's not like, we're going to sit and talk to you for you should be insulted if somebody says we're going to change your behavior in a weekend as you sit here and listen to us. No, we're not. You'll go away with some great ideas, and you've seen this 1,000 times. Oh, we're all fired up, our hair's on fire, we're all motivated, we go back to work, and 3 days later, nothing's changed, only you're now questioning yourself. And that's the part I hate about that phenomenon. People they don't question the learning phenomenon, they question themselves. Maybe I'm the one who didn't get it. Is there something wrong with me? They don't consider that there's something wrong with the whole premise. That you're going to sit on a chair for 2 days and somehow 20 years of ingrained thinking and behavior is going to be dissolved in this new version that's going to emerge. It does not happen that way.
Right.
Not that I feel strongly about that or anything. So.
Yeah. Chris, what inspired you to write The Power to Transform?
For years, people have been clamoring for me to write a book. And I put it off and I said, look, you hear me say this all the time. You don't really learn anything from books. Now, to contextualize that, that's not to suggest that you ought not to read books. What I said is you don't learn anything. You might get inspired to learn something from a book, like I did when I read I got inspired to learn Aikido and so forth. I said, but until there's a way that I can figure out how to get people to be more interactive with the content, the promise was, well, if we read your book, is that the same thing as going through the program? The answer is no, because you're not getting the practice. Well, then, the internet arrived and grew up, and finally there was a way where we set up a website that goes with the book, where you can go and do the assignments and put in all this stuff. And I'm still in the Providence was smiling, so I finally said, okay, I'm gonna write a book. And I had a connection with a big-time media guy in New York, so I called him up. I said, let's figure out how to get the book deal done. And he says, okay, no problem. So he says, be in my office in a month, here in New York City. So I go, and we're going to go out to lunch, and one of the guys that used to work for him was then the CEO of Rodale, big publishing company. So we have this nice lunch at the Four Seasons, the usual New Yorkie stuff. And, as we're doing coffee, he says, we need to get a book deal done here for Chris. Oh, sure, no problem. What are you? In 15 minutes, we articulated a book deal. They advanced me $100,000 to write the book, which nobody does anymore.
Hey.
Yeah. And then they assigned me a ghostwriter because I'd never written books. I'd written papers and all sorts of stuff. And then, so we went to work on the book. I had to get rid of the ghostwriter. Do you remember back when Oprah had a book club and there was this big scandal about some guy writing these books where the factual basis had been modified?
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
I remember very well, yeah.
I would tell him, here's how we did this stuff with the Army, and here's how it happened. He said, well, that's great, but we need to change this a little bit and that a little bit. I said, no, you don't understand. We're not changing anyway because that didn't happen that way. Well, but it'll read better. I don't care if it reads better. The people that I'm talking about here are all still alive, and they will know, as will I, that that's not the way it happened. So we had a few rounds of that, and I ended up finishing it on my own. And unfortunately for me, by the time we got it done, the guy who was the CEO of Rodale had moved on, and the new CEO came in, and it wasn't her project, and blah, 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 blah. So we never got the support that I'd hoped for.
Well, did she put new conditions, or?
No, she just wanted to have her own projects,
Right. And Chris, how was you explained that you had the ghostwriter, but the whole writing process, how was it? Was it easy, difficult? If you can just walk me through.
It was a bit of a challenge in that I'm trying to write a book and run a company at the same time, right? So I thought, well, I write papers and stuff, and the way I do it is I just close the door to my office and get to work. I'll just do that with this book. It can't be that much different. I had to abandon that because apparently the people that worked with me didn't understand that when the door was closed, that meant don't come in here. So after too many interruptions, you write, so once you get going and you get the train going, it doesn't work if somebody barges in and you have to have a 15-minute conversation, try and go, oh, I have no idea where I was here. So then I said, okay, I'm going to stay home every morning and discipline myself, and that's what it really took. I'd go downstairs in my office at home, and I set myself up. I had to write for at least 90 minutes. I couldn't leave the room until I'd gotten 90 minutes or X number of pages. And the first part the big challenge was always the first few sentences every morning. I'd just sit there and stare at the screen, read what I'd written, and went, that sucks. Then I'd go back and fool with it some, and then, all right, let's try the next. And then, but after a while, I got a rhythm and a pace and banged it out pretty quickly. But it took that kind of a structure and discipline. I was thinking, I'm so bright, I can just knock this out in my free time in the office. No.
Was there a chapter that was particularly difficult to write, or?
Particularly difficult. Well, I think probably the chapter on centering, it's not so much that it was difficult in that, the content, I didn't really get the content because it's my book. I think the challenge there was trying to explain a phenomenon that you really can't fully grasp unless you've experienced it. So I was pressed with how would I best explain this? And then I recalled there's a portion there that describes this moment when I was in Africa, and we surprised a pride of lions at the edge of a river. And the adults went one way and the cubs went the other, and we were in the middle, and that's really not where you want to be between the parents and the kids. With the pride of lions. And some guys kind of freaked out. I found myself in this, I can only describe it as a slightly altered state where I knew, dropping down Express Center, but in that moment, the whole premise of center is to be present, open, and connected. And I can only say that I was more present, like literally right here, right now, in that moment than I'd ever been in my life. There's something about a lion roaring at you, and it's personal. He's talking to you. This is not a circus. We're not a movie. They're feigning charges at you. Perturbates your biology in a way that nothing else that I've experienced ever does. And so, okay, we gathered ourselves. Said, okay, let's move towards the river, and then we'll let the lions get back together. Seemingly a good idea. As we move towards the river, all of a sudden the river erupts, and it's an angry hippo, as we've now intruded on his territory, and hippos are more dangerous than lions. Yeah, so now we're sitting there going, holy shit, 5 minutes ago I was kind of bored walking through here, now I'm in the middle of an Indiana Jones movie, what the hell? And so we inched our way up the riverbank and got out of that, and, had a little adrenaline dump for that, but the challenge was finding ways that people could kind of connect or try and connect to the experience I was describing. So I don't know if that was difficult, but certainly a challenge.
Yeah. And the editing process, was it an easy task?
Well, yeah, if you have a good editor, once we got a rhythm together, we go back and forth, and she was quite good. And cut some fluff, and we rearranged some things, and it went smoothly. Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about leadership, which has become one of the most talked about topics in business. Why do you think so many leaders still struggle with it?
Well, a couple reasons. One, we still don't understand what it is, or they don't understand what it is. And two, way too many of the people who are now in leadership roles ascended up through management ranks, and they don't get the difference between leadership and management. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of work with CEOs. My favorite ones are people who are newly in the job. And I asked them, I have my little process, I asked them a question. All right, you're now the leader of this organization. What are your main responsibilities? And they will invariably give me this laundry list. And, well, we got financials and shareholders and stakeholders and regulators and yada, 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 yada. This big laundry list of things.
Right.
Okay. That's nice, but no. They look at me like, huh? I said, those are all managerial things. You're not a manager anymore. You have people now whose responsibility is to do all of that. You're a leader. As a leader, you only have two fundamental responsibilities. Two. Number one, you're the guardian of the mood of the enterprise. And number two, you're the architect of the future. And you cannot do either of those well if you're going to insist on having your fingers in all the little managerial pies that are out there all the time. And that's a very tough transition for people to make.
Right. Yeah. Listening to you, Chris, how do you build trust under pressure?
Well, in general, you don't. You need a foundation of trust so that when you get under pressure, it doesn't get fractured. So if when we're working with a special forces team, there's 12 guys on a team, they spend most of their time training. And it is in those moments that you begin to build trust, right? You learn, how to do it. And then you also have to understand we have a different interpretation of trust. Okay, so people tend to think of trust as a feeling. And as I tell people, the problem with that is everybody knows your feelings are kind of like the weather, subject to change without notice. And that's not really the foundation on which you can build a high-performing team is feelings. So the other way we tend to think about trust is it's a thing. You listen to the way people talk about it. Well, I gave him my trust, and then he broke it. So now I took it back, and he's going to have to earn it. So, well, it's not a thing either. So to understand it deeply, you have to understand that trusts, like leadership, are what we refer to as linguistic somatic phenomenon, right? So trust is really a three-part assessment, right? And it comes into play when someone's making a promise to me. And that's what it is to be on a team, is you make some specific, mostly kind of unspoken but assumed promises to each other. And when someone makes a promise to me, I'm automatically assuming their sincerity. Are they being straight with me or are they bullshitting me? Their competence, does he, she have the skill set to do what they say they're going to do? And their reliability, right? Can I count on them to do what they say when it's time to do it? And that's what all these training cycles are for, is you learn to see who can really do what they say, who can really do it on time, all the time, etc. And so when you get under pressure, I know that I can rely on my people. So that's why in sports teams, you spend so much time practicing. It's for those moments when the pressure arrives. And the problem with business is we do just the opposite. We don't spend any time practicing. And then when pressure arrives, things tend to cave in rather quickly.
The beauty of sport, and I'm not sure if we can apply it in business, because it doesn't matter how much you train and prepare, especially at the top level, you have no control of the outcome, that you're going to win a game or a match.
Well, that's true, but if I go out on the pitch playing rugby or football or whatever, I've got no control of the outcome there either. All I can control is what I do and what, and we as a team, we can control what we do. We don't have any, the enemy, as they say, the enemy gets a vote too. And, we have no control if it's going to rain or, any of that stuff. But that doesn't bother us in the sense of we still go out, we play our game and we do what we do. And as long as we're doing the best that we know how to do, the result will take care of itself one way or another. Do we always win? No. But that's who wants to win all the time. There's no fun in that.
What's one military leadership lesson every CEO should learn, in your opinion?
One. Wow. Well, that's a good question. I would say in the military, they teach officers this phenomenon called command presence. Right? And some people think it's about, puffing your chest up and barking at people, and it's not that at all. It's a certain kind of embodied confidence that human beings are biologically programmed to respond to. And this is part of what we teach with our leadership work, is it's what we call building the body of a leader. And when I use the term body in this case, I don't mean size, shape, or gender. I'm talking about how you present yourself, how you carry yourself. And the military is really quite good, at that. And at the same time, people know when you're faking it, right? And that produces a whole different set of breakdowns. So it all comes down to the fundamental practices of being a leader. One of them is developing your personal brand of presence.
You've worked with elite performers across many fields. What do top performers have in common in military or sport or in business?
Yeah. They operate on a set of shared principles that most of the world, understands but doesn't live by. And this is part of research and observation. We found that the elite performers in any arena, whether it's sports, the military, business, the arts, musicians, they have a continued commitment to develop their awareness, self-awareness. Right? They don't just kind of blindly go through life. They have a commitment to get where they're very clear that everything that happens to me is a result of the choices that I make. Right? So I always get that I'm at choice. They understand the difference between ability and willingness. And this is a tough one for some people. As I say in my book, I said, as a human being, I'm infinitely able. If any human being can do something, that means I can do it. That doesn't mean I'm competent in the moment, right? So, and then also you have to recognize the limitations of the human body. At this point in life, no matter how committed I am, I'm not going to go play in the NBA. Just not going to happen. My body's past the point where that's going to happen. So I have to recognize that. They live from the point of view of accountable, right? I'm accountable for everything that I do. They understand the nature of commitment. And then we just talked about trust, honesty, integrity. So there's those 8 principles. We call them the universal performance principles. And people who are consistently elite performers or high performers, that's how they live their lives, is by those principles. And it doesn't matter what culture they're from, what language they speak, they're present everywhere.
You've been, Chris, outspoken about corporate training. Why do most leadership programs fail?
Well, we've kind of touched on it already, but it's a self-defeating cycle. So the HR department, who doesn't have a lot of credibility to begin with, proposes a leadership development program, and here's the budget. Oh, we can't afford that, so come up with something that's less expensive. So what might have been, by design, a pretty robust program gets whittled down to, well, let's just do 2 days because, blah, 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 blah. And the problem is, again, not understanding what it takes to develop competence. They settle for checking boxes. So, okay, we had a leadership development program, didn't seem to make much difference, or we had a leadership development program, everybody in their survey said they liked it. And that's not the point. As I tell everybody, when we work with big companies, I make it really clear to the senior execs, if I'm doing my job really well, my team and I, if you've got 3,000 people we're going to work with, or 2,000 people, by the time we're done, 2 to 3% of your people will quit. And we don't charge you any extra for that. Right? We helped you cull the herd, right? Because the people who quit are the ones who don't want to live by those principles I just talked about. They don't want accountability. They don't want clarity. They don't want people, they don't want to have to live with be generating trust and stuff. They've been perfectly happy hiding out or kind of underperforming or whatever. And, that's just not the way that it works if you want to be high performers. You've got to be willing to make some of those tough choices. So if you've got a leadership program and it's only going to be 2 days, you can rest assured nothing much is going to happen. And The problem then is the cycle begins. So that didn't work. So when the department comes back with another program, well, that last one didn't even work. So why should we spend more on this one? So you have a smaller budget, and pretty soon we're doing, brown bags over lunch, expecting somehow that's going to produce new competence in people, and that's just farcical. We're doing our large-scale programs. The price tag on those things was $500,000 to $700,000.
Wait.
Yeah, and the caveat to that, or the good news to that, is they came with a financial promise. You will get at least 10 times what you invest in this program back inside the time frame of the engagement, not at some distant point in the future, but before we're done. So on the face of it, you should be figuring out how many of these you can do, not how few.
Yeah.
And we've got documents after documents of evidence to support that claim. We made that claim for 15 years, never once had to spend an extra day on a project.
You mentioned many CEOs come from financial backgrounds. Why is that a problem?
Well, I have to be careful with generalities here, but the two places that I see people move to the C-suite that have the most difficulty are from finance and legal. Finance people are trained to look at numbers. They're not trained to understand the underlying phenomenon that produces those numbers, nor do they get the fact that if I'm looking at the numbers, it's always like I'm looking in the rearview mirror, right? So I'm looking at my quarterly numbers. Well, those are numbers from the last quarter. You're now at least 60 to 90 days behind where we are right now. They don't have forward. I mean, yes, we make projections, but they don't understand what's the human set of commitments and networks and mobilizations and coordinations that go into producing all those. And they tend to make kind of silly decisions based on numbers because it looks like it makes sense on paper. You remember Circuit City? Big electronics retailer here in the country some years ago.
Not really, no.
Yeah, well, there's this. It's a tragic story, but it's an all too familiar one. So the company got bought out by some private equity firm, who saddled it up with debt, and of course they had to cut expenses to begin to pay this thing off. Christmas season's coming up. It's the big time of the year, particularly for electronics retailers. And their brilliant financial analysts looked and said, well, look, we've got like this 10% of the sales force that we're paying all this money to. Why don't we just get some less expensive salespeople? So they fired the top 10% of their sales performers right before the biggest season of the year because it looked good on paper. 9 weeks later, they were out of business. They didn't make anywhere near the goal. They had to go back and try and rehire these guys, many of whom said, piss off. Some of them, sure, I'll come back, but you have to pay me twice as much. But it all looked good in the financial projections. There's some math that I do with finance guys. They don't like it. But I said, look, part of our dilemma is we're still stuck in industrial era thinking. Right? You guys are set up to measure and track input, output, throughput. You've got all these financial things. But there's this whole phenomenon that you're completely blind to. Your models are completely blind to. So we talk about waste in an organization. So typically when we say waste, you tend to think industrial era, right? Scrap, excess inventory, people standing around doing nothing, right? That kind of waste, industrial era waste, is quote, simple because you can see it. Most companies don't make things anymore. They're what we call coordination companies. The value generators are not industrial laborers, and I don't mean to demean them at all, but they're what we call coordination workers. They don't make things. They generate value out of their effective coordination with each other to produce customer satisfaction, whether the customer is internal or external. Coordination waste is, when we have a meeting and everybody smiles and nods, but we didn't really get clear about who's going to do what. So people run off and get, kind of going kind of silly. We have, bad moods. We have a lack of innovation, and we've devolved now into what we call modern indentured servitude. All these things produce a malaise in the organization that begins to stifle productivity. And I showed them some math. I did this for a great big sporting goods, sportswear shoe company who will go unnamed from Portland, Oregon. And, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. I said, well, if you do this, according to Gartner and McKinsey, people get done what they say they're going to get done in the American workplace anywhere from 30 to 60% of the time. So I'm going to give you the highest possible mark according to all the statistics, 60%. Nobody gets everything done on time. So we ran some numbers, and basically what I showed them was you're leaking about $1.5 billion a year out of here in coordination waste, and none of your financial systems can even see it, let alone know what to do about it. They
Yeah.
asked me to move. We'd like to help you out. Which way did you come in?
Chris, you shared a fascinating insight about Henry Ford and motivating workers. What can leaders learn from that story?
Yeah. I don't know. You're going to have to remind me of which Henry Ford story that was.
That was during our intro chat.
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't remember, as there's a bunch of stories about Henry Ford. Well, what Henry Ford did was really simple. Now we're just moving into the industrialized mass production, and the challenge that he and his peers were trying to solve was simple, which is how do we take uneducated, unskilled, unsophisticated farm workers and day laborers and turn them into productive factory workers. And the answer they came up with was perfect for the time, not so much for the humanity. Was first, we're going to de-skill the work. So we're going to break the work into little tiny units that in and of themselves don't take much in the way of skill to do. So you might have been a craftsman making leather seats and whatnot for horse-drawn carriages or building beautiful wooden facades for them. But here you're going to put 5 bolts on a Model T wheel all day, every day. If you don't like that, that's fine. In those days, there was no social safety net. So if you didn't work, you didn't eat. Great. So thus was born the beginnings of the industrial mass production era. Well, Ford was right enough to say, well, if I'm ever going to sell a lot of these cars, we got to have people who can afford them. So he started paying people, $5 an hour back in the early teens and 20s. That was unprecedented. Had people clamoring to come and work for him. Right? And there's places today where you're hard placed to get $5 an hour. And that just exploded. This whole movement of began the process of building, the eventually what became the middle class in the country. Now, I don't know if that's the one you're referring to, but
it was that story. Yeah, and I found it fascinating because that was a long time ago. In terms of the supply chain of the automotive industry, to motivate those workers that didn't have any clue, any skill within the industry itself.
Right. For 2 reasons. One, the industry was new, so nobody had, any skill in it, and they were making it up as they went along. But 2, these guys were uneducated and so forth. Now, our dilemma today is all those management practices, which were literally invented by guys who were born in the 1800s, right? Set the foundation for how we think about management today. That part hasn't changed. Work has changed, the workforce has changed, but our approach to management hasn't, and that's the fundamental thing that we're fighting against in companies today. Everybody, well, how do we get people engaged? Stop treating them like Henry Ford's workers. We think of management in those days meant supervision. Right? You had to keep an eye on, the lines to make sure people were producing. So that's what people are still taught, and it's what they teach you in business school. It's more sophisticated because now we have statistical models, but it's still the basic same thing. We don't teach anything about coordination practices, which is what we should be teaching. Mobilization. We don't teach anything about that. We're still teaching industrial era theory with a little technology added to it. And then we're surprised when people aren't really inspired or motivated.
Been talking a couple of times with guests about high achievers It doesn't matter, sport or in business. And this constant need of scaling, of doing more. You start a project, you finish the project, you succeed, and you move on, and it doesn't stop. And the main topic, Chris, it's about feeling empty, not fulfilled personally. And quite often, those high achievers, yes, in one hand, they are successful, but on the other hand, they look back and they see either they miss a big part within their personal life, family, and stuff like that. Small kids, they grew up without the presence of the father or the mom. Do you think we've become obsessed with achievement while neglecting meaning, in your opinion, Chris?
You just like all these little lightweight questions, don't you?
No, because it's fascinating. You worked with the military, with
Yeah, no, I think the answer to that is yes. And as you described it, I'm going, oh, he's talking about me. I'm one of those guys. Absolutely. I think, the dilemma is when you talk about meaning, meaning is an ascriptive thing. We assign meaning to things. So if I'm making something up now. So if I'm sitting around, the family gathering at Christmas, supposedly having one of those, great intimate moments of connection and so forth, and all we're doing is fighting and getting drunk, if that was what meaning was, I don't really need that. And so it depends on things. So, I'll personalize it. So for years, when we were rocking and rolling, I was gone 2 to 3 weeks out of every month. Right? I was that guy. And part of me loved it because the work that I was doing was really satisfying. And I don't just mean we're making money, but, when you're doing transformation work and you see people make this dramatic shifts over the course of 4 or 5 days, it doesn't get any more rewarding than that. And at the same time, as I tell people, look, I knew my way around every major airport in the country. I could find my way around most of the big cities. It came to a head when I started getting Christmas cards from Hertz Rent-A-Car and, various hotel chains. And I used to believe when I was, when the company was in its growing stages, I was the youngest person of my senior management, right? I was the leader of the team, but the youngest one. And I always, in my head, believed, for me to legitimately claim to be the leader, it means I've got to be better, than any of them at everything. So I was the best salesperson, I was the best program designer, best deliverer. I knew more about the finances than the accounting team. And, I got fried in the process. It cost me a marriage. It was a mess until I finally woke up like, okay, I get satisfaction from all this. There's no doubt about it. And the other parts of my life, it's not that they weren't satisfying, but it was a different kind of satisfaction. It was a different kind of meaning. And then, of course, there's the whole phenomenon as you grow up and get more mature, meaning takes on, dare we say it, a different meaning. What was meaningful to me back then, not so much now. And what's meaningful to me now, that guy would scoff at. So I'm not sure if that's an answer to your question or just more kind of philosophical.
And it is. Because when someone says, hey, I've achieved everything I wanted, but I still feel empty.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, I don't know, is that a leadership problem, a purpose problem, or an identity problem?
Well, I think it's more, we started, when we started working with athletes, I would run across these people and they're training all the time and working really hard. And I'd finally, and yet, did the same thing. They weren't really satisfied. It was clear that they were doing what they were doing, but they weren't getting a lot of joy or pleasure or anything out of it. So I can always ask, what is it you're running for? And I quickly began to see in many cases, it wasn't that they were running, and I use running generically, they weren't running for anything, they're running from, right?
Right. That's the,
Yeah. So Okay, so what you're running from is you don't want to go home because whatever is going on there. And it's easier to come out here and burn yourself out and exhaust yourself and and deal with that kind of pain than go back home and deal with the emotional pain that's waiting for you there.
Oh boy,
Challenge,
we
yeah.
can talk about this stuff for days.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Now you're swimming out in the deep end here.
Yeah, no, no, it's yeah. No, there is so much to discuss. I mean, especially here in Scandinavia, I'm not sure if you are familiar with the culture, maybe within EU, but even in Europe, Scandinavian are a bit unique in the way we approach leadership. Yes, it's structured like in any other major Western country, but we always say that we don't believe in we have a flat structure. You know, you have different departments and stuff like that, but then quite often there is an issue of, I will not say order or following instructions, but there is an issue where someone doesn't achieve, he or she, their target or doesn't accomplish the task that is being assigned. There is no accountability, to be honest with you, which is, in one hand, frustrating for some, and on the other hand, the question I keep asking folks here: how do you move forward? You know, on one hand, you have a very strong and powerful union rules in terms of which is good, that protects the workers and stuff like that. But when it comes to check and balances or accountability, the leaders here, they get stuck all the time, and they always come up with the excuse, but my hands are tied, you know. And it's funny, you were talking about all the training that the HR departments in various companies and industries, they throw and they plan a year. I don't know, maybe they try to justify their existence because they're doing something. But then those trainings, they don't lead to any kind of tangible
Right, result.
positive outcome, result, you know. And still I ask myself, or put the question forward, why you don't try to change the system or make it simple, or in one hand you don't throw money from the window because we don't see any progress. And I feel like people quite often, maybe I might be wrong, but I've seen it. My conclusion is quite often organizations and decision makers, they're a little bit skeptic or scared of change. The concept of change scare people. And it's funny because every time there is a trend, now we are in the AI bubble. You know, everyone is trying to make sense of what can we implement or train or educate, because if we don't take action in a couple of months or a couple of years, we're gonna feel like we are left behind. So yeah, with
Well,
no sorry, go ahead.
no, I say there's a kind of a global terror these days about AI, and it's pretty interesting to me if you look historically. So, but I interrupted your train of thought here. I've got some comments for you, but I'll let you please finish.
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, so you're talking about a few different but connected phenomenon here. So let's start with the basic thing, as I say it all the time. Like, everybody's all in favor of change, as long as it doesn't mean me and it doesn't mean now. All right. So it's a really good idea. You guys should get right on that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, let's go back to some of the things you said earlier about these organizations and flat and everything. And one of the things I work on with people is we need to understand what type of organization are we actually trying to create here. And in my view, there's what we call there's three types of social organization structures. And if you think of it as a continuum, out here on the far end is teams, and teams have three other categories, excuse me. There's an operational team, a high-performing team, and a world-class team. So there's the world of teams. It's a small segment of our continuum. In the middle is a big segment called community. Okay? And then down here, there's kind of this really, which we call family. Right? And the distinction here, what separates these three things, is the horizon of time over which we tolerate non-performance and non-conformance. On a team, that horizon is pretty short. Right? If you're not getting the job done, we'll trade you or we'll put you down, on the B team or whatever. And the farther out you go in world-class teams, that horizon's really short. In community, what makes a community is it still has standards that draw the boundaries around the community. If you're a member of a bike club and you don't show up for enough meetings or don't ever go on any of the rides, you're going to get kicked out of the club. If you get enough parking tickets, they'll eventually put you in jail. Family, the horizon is infinite. Uncle Morty might be a jerk and he's out there running around drunk every Saturday night, but he's still our uncle. He shows up every year at Thanksgiving, like it or not, there he is. And too often in business, I don't think people are clear what they're doing, which of those they're doing. You listen to them, well, yeah, we got to be a high-performing team because that's the only way we're going to win, but we want it to feel like a family. Those two things don't go together.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? Nobody gets a bad performance review in the family. And so for leaders, one of the things I had to learn the hard way, I had a tough teacher on this. It's not your job to have everybody like you. In fact, that's a pipe dream. Your job is to mobilize the resources and people to accomplish the mission of the team or the company, period. Right? It's not to brutalize people. That doesn't do it. It's not to just go and slash and burn expenses. That doesn't do it. And that's to your point. That's why we have some of these protections from unions and so forth. But the unions too often tend to fall into inhibiting change because they're afraid that their members they're going to lose jobs or they're going to lose something. They're operating more out of fear than possibility. And that's a tough transition for them to make because that's been their orientation. So we've got all these kind of forces conspiring into a great conspiracy of mediocrity. If we push too hard for performance, we're going to annoy the unions or the regulators or something. And if we don't, well, then we're going to annoy the shareholders. And so there's this kind of a quiet conspiracy where everybody's like, well, okay, if we just make little improvements, that'll be okay. And then we've got the entrepreneurial environment, right? Part of the reason people start their own companies is they're just fed up with all that. The A-level performers that you were talking about, they can't stand that kind of work environment. And so they leave those companies and you're left with the B and C players. And unfortunately, over time, that's a death sentence for companies. Without the A players, you're not going to get innovation. You're not going to get drive. You're not going to get people pushing you to push the boundaries. And pretty soon the company, well, we've got lots of rules and we've got procedures and we don't want to have anything too radical happen. That's great until you get blindsided by some competitor and you're caught flat-footed and they eat your lunch and all the things that you were afraid of start happening in a very rapid cascade, to the point where you're out of business. So, you might have had all the great union protections in the world, but if the company goes out of business, that hasn't done you a lot of good now, has it?
You're listening to the Pre-Zero Sports Talk. For more conversations on sports leadership, faith, performance, and innovation from Sweden to the world, visit prezerosportstalk.com. Good. Now it's time for our lightning round.
Oh, boy.
Ready for speedy Q&A?
Oh, dun, 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 dun.
All right.
Okay, let her rip.
Let's do this. One book everyone should read.
Well, besides mine, one book everyone should read. I liked actually Barack Obama's book, and the title is not in my head right now, but I would recommend that to everybody. I'll just stop there because this is the lightning round.
Best advice you've ever received.
The minute that I've got a big question as to whether or not I can trust somebody inside my company, that person needs to be gone.
Right. The worst career advice you ever gotten.
Well, it wasn't career advice, it was financial advice. There was a point in time when I'd accumulated a rather substantial bunch of cash and I didn't know much about investing. And I had a friend who was an investment broker and he put it all into 3 or 4 big industrial companies that slowly tanked when I could have been early on into Microsoft, Amazon, Starbucks. Well, all those companies all got started here, but not me. I missed all 3 of those.
Wow. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Coffee, tea, or something else?
Depends on time of day. I'm a cup of coffee guy in the morning. I'll have tea during the day. After work, something else.
Something else. And during the writing process of your book, was it coffee or tea or something else?
I was a little bit of all 3 of those, depending on
Or
where I was.
depending on the
Yeah.
yeah.
I try not to start the day with a shot of scotch, but every once in a while, need some inspiration.
Yeah. Morning person or a night owl?
Now, I'm a morning person.
Biggest leadership myth?
Biggest leadership map is it's what I call the Lone Ranger or the cowboy, the noble guy who did it all on his own. There is no such character. Nobody ever built anything great by themselves.
One habit that changed your life?
Daily meditation.
And the best way to unwind after, let's say, a tough day or a tough week?
Well, now you're going to get into the X-rated stuff. So, setting aside that, I'll sit on the back porch, have a cigar and some scotch.
Nice. Nice. Here, cigar is always with cognac, but yeah. Favorite place you've ever traveled?
Oh boy. Well, in terms of cities, I like Barcelona. In terms of, but I spent a lot of my time traveling in the quote wild. I would say trekking and hiking around Peru in the old Inca. We did the Inca Trail and going through those old cities and ruins and stuff, and still being baffled by how they built all that stuff. You look at some of that stonework, and we can't recreate that stuff today. So you're like,
Yeah.
how are they moving 100-ton pieces of rock around and making seams that you can't get a piece of paper under? It's absolutely a mystery. And hiking down and walking into Machu Picchu and the view from up above is just spectacular.
Most underrated leadership skill?
Listening.
Oh, I agree with you. Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Actually, the number one leadership skill, and people
Yeah.
don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Listening is, it's tough. It's tough. Yeah. If you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who would it be and why?
Thomas Jefferson. I've always had a fascination with him. I've been down to Monticello a couple times, gotten the behind-the-scenes tour. I'm just fascinated by the way that he thought and the contextual work that he did, creating the country, for heaven's sakes, at a young age. Because, the founding fathers to me are literally, American icons, American heroes, and global heroes. They set in place something that I'm sure they had no idea the implications of where this whole thing was going to go.
What does success mean to you today?
Well, success to me is multidimensional. It's doing work that I find satisfying, that gives me a sense of accomplishment and purpose. It's producing financial rewards to go with it, and it's having a series of relationships. What's the adjective I'm looking for here? Of deep connection with people.
And finally, a piece of advice or wisdom to our listeners on any topic.
Everybody always asks, what's your one piece of advice? And I always say, don't listen to one piece of advice. Because it's always trivial. It's like cat posters. No, my one piece of advice, literally, if you want success in anything, you've got to be a lifelong learner. There's no other way about it.
Right. Chris, Majer, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight on leadership, transformation, human potential, resilience, and high performance. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, my friend. I hope that your audience enjoys it. And if they don't, I did.
Before we wrap up, Chris, where can listeners connect with you and learn more about your work?
Well, they can come over and join me for a cigar on the back porch. But if that doesn't
Scotch.
work, you got to bring your own. Go to humanpotentialproject.com is the easiest way. That's the website. You can get my book, The Power to Transform, on Amazon. We used to sell them, but frankly, Amazon gets them cheaper and faster, so we let them do what they do best. And, that's about it. It's simple, it's easy. We're all over social media.
Yeah, and we're going to put all the links in our show notes. And for our listeners, I would like to leave you with a few words from Peter Drucker. The best way to predict the future is to create it. That quote feels fitting after today's conversation. Transformation, is it something that happened to us? It's something we actively create through choices, practice, discipline, and purpose. Thanks a lot. We want to thank you for joining our show. If you enjoyed this episode, we have more for you. You can now watch the entire episode on our YouTube and Spotify channels. While you're here, subscribe and don't forget to tap the bell. Visit prezerosportstalk.com to explore more conversations on sports, leadership, faith, performance, and innovation. From Sweden to the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and make a difference. We'll see you soon. Take care.